Why in the hell am I talking about a movie? I don't talk about movies. I used to talk about movies on my blogs. If you go to calebjones.com/blog, you can look up my old movie reviews and things like that I used to talk about over there. I stopped in 2017. I wrote an article about why I stopped in 2017 because Hollywood does not know how to make quality movies anymore. Western civilizational collapse and left-wing societal programming and all the usual stuff. So why am I talking about a movie today? Well, I will tell you, this is Caleb Jones, and this is Alpha Male 2.0, the Alpha Male 2.0 podcast. And today I'm going to do something radically different with this podcast and with really anything I've ever done. I've never done anything like this before. We'll see how it goes. This is actually, as I record this is my day off. And so I don't normally work Sundays. So this morning, I just woke up, had a very relaxing morning. I didn't do any of my morning routine. I haven't exercised this morning. I haven't meditated. I haven't done any of my work routines this morning. I haven't even taken a shower. As I talk to you right now, here in my office, looking out over Dubai, I haven't even taken a shower. I'm just having a very lazy, relaxing morning. I try to have these once a week so I can recharge and be functional and productive for the rest of the week. And last night, I saw the news that this movie that I'm going to discuss is celebrating its 40th anniversary. I think June 13th or June 12th, I don't remember the exact date, but it has just celebrated its 40th anniversary. And this particular movie is an unusually pivotal movie for me, for my life, for my upbringing, for the direction of my life. It is what I consider to be the best movie ever made in all of human history. That is what I consider it to be, and there are other people who agree with me, there's some who disagree. It is also my favorite movie of all time. So I've been asked, hey Caleb, what are your top 10 favorite movies and things like that, and well, I can tell you my favorite movie of all time, it's this movie, the movie I'm going to talk about in this podcast. Now that's interesting because most of the movies that I really like that I consider my top 10 are not movies that people would consider the best movies ever made. But this movie is so unique and so special and so magical and such a lightning in a bottle experience. This movie I consider not only my favorite movie of all time, but also the best movie ever made, in my opinion. And of course, for the rest of this podcast, you're gonna get a lot of my opinions. I don't normally speak emotionally, but in this podcast, you're gonna get pure emotion from me. We'll see how this goes. I don't know how this podcast is gonna end up, but we'll see. In addition, this movie features my favorite movie protagonist of all time. That's saying a lot because the original Captain Kirk was a very, very big protagonist for me as a kid. Han Solo was a big protagonist for me as a kid, but this protagonist in this movie is bigger than all of them, better than all of them, and a significant influence in how I ended up as an adult, and specifically Alpha Male 2.0. So this movie and the character portrayed in this movie, there is a lot of direct connective tissue between this movie, this 1981 movie, and where I ended up in life and Alpha Male 2.0. I will discuss all of that in this podcast. This movie also features my favorite piece of music of all time. There's a lot of music I like, and I'm a heavy metal guy, and I like heavy metal from the 80s. There's some modern day heavy metal I like. I love classical music. I like lots of different types of music. And there are songs that are very important to me, that motivate me, that excite me, that I think are works of art and are masterpieces. But the music in this movie is better than the music of any other movie, including Star Wars movies. And there's a particular piece of music in this movie that is the best piece of music, my favorite piece of music of all time. I used to listen to this piece of music over and over and over again as a kid, and to this very day I still listen to it. And even though I am almost 50, I'm 49 years old as I record this, I'm turning 50 next year. This movie is also not only my favorite movie of all time, but it is the most influential movie of my entire life. And again, there are lots of movies that I really love, I think are amazing. So if you were to put a gun to my head and force me to pick my second favorite movie of all time, that would be the extended version of the 3 original Lord of the Rings movies all clicked together as one big, 12-hour movie. That would be probably my second favorite movie of all time. Not probably, that is. But is it an influential movie? Did that movie influence me and change the direction of my life and influence me as a man? No, it really didn't. They're just great movies that I really enjoyed. Movies like Terminator 2, Predator, these are great movies. And some of them were not influential at all. Some of them are a little influential. But this movie that I'm going to discuss in this podcast is by far By far, the most influential movie of my entire life. In many respects, it set the path for my life, even though I didn't know that as a 9-year-old kid watching this movie for the first time, and many times subsequent to that. So we have that. This is also the movie that I saw the most amount of times in a real movie theater. I saw this movie back in 1981 5 times in the movie theater. It was like a drug. I couldn't get enough of it. And back then, we did not have a VCR. We had no way of rewatching movies back then. VCRs were out, but my family was poor. My dad couldn't afford one. So I had no other option. So if you loved a movie back when I was a kid, you had to go see it, and then you had to go see it again and again and again before it left the theaters. And then you would either never see it again, or you'd have to wait like 6, 7, 8 years for it to come on normal TV, NBC, CBS, ABC. But then it would have commercials and shit, and it was bad. So I saw this movie in the movie theater 5 times. There is no other movie that I have ever seen more than twice in a movie theater. This movie I saw 5 times. It was that special to me. It was that spiritual for me, and that really is a real word to describe my connection with this movie and this character. And what movie am I talking about? Well, you probably already saw the title of this podcast. That's Raiders of the Lost Ark. So before I tell you what happened with me in this movie and how this movie has influenced me and really set the stage for a lot of my life, and is actually responsible for aspects of who I am as a man. I'm getting a little emotional as I'm talking about this. I can't believe this shit. This is crazy. Maybe I'll start crying. I love this movie. No, just kidding. So before I get into that, I got to give you some context, because you may say, well, God, just a fucking movie, Caleb. Who cares? Let me give you the context. So I was born in 1972. I was born in the 70s, although I grew up in the 80s. And that's generally how it works. You grow up in the decade after you were born. So if you were born in the 80s, you didn't grow up in the 80s, you grew up in the 90s, you're a 90s kid. If you were born in the 70s, you grew up in the 80s, you're an 80s kid. If you were born in the 2000s, you grew up in the 2010s, and so on. You get my point. So I was born in the 70s, but I grew up in the 80s. And toward the late 70s, you had this giant, massive upswing of ultra high quality science fiction movies. You had Star Wars. You had The Empire Strikes Back. You had Superman the movie. You had Alien. You had Close Encounters. A little after that, you had E.T. You had this giant upswing of quality in terms of science fiction genre movies, and I became immersed in that world as a small child very quickly. And back then, at least for me, I didn't just go see a movie. Once I saw a movie like this, I had to have everything. I had to buy the book. I had to buy the comic book, even though I didn't like comic books back then. I had to buy the making of book. They had these very high color, glossy making of books back then. Again, we didn't have an internet. We didn't have Netflix or that stuff. We were kind of on our own. Any magazines that came out about that movie, I had to buy and read, and I would devour. I had to buy the LP of the music of that movie. And we didn't call them LPs back then. We called them records. So when Star Wars came out in 1977, and I saw it, I was 5 years old, blew me away. So I had to have that music. So my dad bought me the LP, this beautiful, you open it up, it had pictures from the movie, and you put it in your record. I had this little record player, this little cheap record player that barely worked. And I would listen to Star Wars music for hours and hours and hours on end. This is John Williams composed music, amazing music. What I would do during the action scenes of the music is I would sit on the edge of my bed and I would bounce up and down. I must have been insane. That's what I did. As like a little kid when I was 5, 6 years old, I would bounce up and down, bounce up for hours. I did it so often there was a divot in my bed when I went to sleep. It was hilarious. Maybe that explains why I never got into drugs later in life or in my teenage years when all my friends were getting into drugs and alcohol and smoking. I never did any of that stuff. Maybe that's why, because I jumped. Matter of fact, later in life or later in my childhood, when I got too big for bouncing up on my bed, I would get one of those little trampolines and I would jump on a trampoline and put on a Sony Walkman or blast my Star Wars music or Indiana Jones music, what have you, and I'd bounce up and down for hours. It was wonderful stress relief, and I would just fantasize about things. It was great. So anyway, that's the context. That's the context of what happened when I saw this movie. So one of my favorite characters, probably my favorite 2 characters, not probably, they were, my favorite 2 characters when I was a little kid, 5, 6, 7 years old, before 1981, before Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, were 2 specific people. They were Han Solo from the 2 Star Wars movies. Return of the Jedi had not come out yet. And actually back then it was called Revenge of the Jedi before it was released. But anyway, and it was, as I mentioned earlier, Captain Kirk. And Captain Kirk on the Star Trek TV show. So every night at 4 p.m., Back in those days, we didn't have cable TV. You had 3 channels. You had ABC, CBS, NBC, and then you had your local channel, and that was about it. So you had maybe 4, maybe 5 channels if you were really lucky. I lived in Portland, Oregon. It was a small city back then, it still is. So didn't have a lot of channels. But I would tune in and watch Star Trek, and I would wish that I was Captain Kirk. Captain Kirk was the most amazing alpha male character that I'd ever seen, because as I've talked about before in my blog posts and other podcasts, I didn't have a lot of alpha male role models when I was growing up. And so I had to look to movies and pop culture, and the 2 that I glommed onto very quickly were Han Solo, who I thought was amazing and cool, and Captain Kirk. I followed these 2 guys religiously, and I wanted to be like them, and I wanted to be as cool as them, and I wanted to get into fights and beat up guys and kiss pretty girls. I didn't really care about the kiss pretty girl stuff because I was 5 years old, but I was into girls, not sexually, but I would fall in love with girls in my kindergarten and 1st grade, and I would fantasize about grabbing them. Like that scene in E.T. where the wind is blowing and he stands on the kid who's on the ground and he kisses the girl who's taller than him. I had fantasized about scenes like that, not sexual stuff, because this is way before puberty, but you get my point. So that's the context, that sets the stage. Superman, Star Wars, all these amazing movies. And at that point, believe it or not, I had not yet seen Jaws, and I had not yet seen Alien, because I was too little and they looked scary to me. And my parents were very religious, at least my mom was. My mom, if you didn't know, was a former nun in the Catholic Church before she married my dad. So she was very hypersensitive about this. So I hadn't even seen Alien, but all those other movies, E.T., Close Encounters, all that stuff. Star Trek, the motion picture, that was an amazing event. Oh my God, now you could go to the movie theater and see Captain Kirk up on the big screen. Holy fucking shit, it was so great. So that sets the stage now for my excitement for what was about to come. And so one day when I was, 9 years old, what I would do is every Sunday, again, this is pre-internet, pre-cell phone, pre-all that shit. We didn't even have a VCR because my dad couldn't afford one. We would get the morning newspaper. And what you did, and if you're my age, you probably relate to this. If you're younger than me, you have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about, so I'll explain it to you. The morning newspaper was the big, thick newspaper of the week. So you had a newspaper every morning, and it was small, but on the Sunday paper, it was really big. And in the Sunday paper only, you had an entire movie section. It was an entire section of the paper that you actually pulled out from the rest of the newspaper, and you opened it up, and it had big pictures of all the movies. And every Sunday, because I love movies, I love science fiction, I love fantasy, I love all these things, I would open up the newspaper and spread it out over the dining room table. And I had to do this when it wasn't near a meal, because I had a big family. It was a family of 7. I'm the oldest of 5 children. My dad was a low-income guy who was barely able to support a family of 7 on his own income. He was the last generation of American men who were able to do that back in the 1970s and early 80s. This is around when the recession was hitting really bad, 1981. Matter of fact, I mentioned some of this in my book, The Unchained Man, alphamalebook.com. But anyway, so I would have to wait when all the goddamn little kids were not eating stuff at the dining room table, because the dining room table was the only table in our house that was big enough where you could spread out the newspaper. So I would spread out the newspaper and I would look at all the movies and look at the movie times and say, Mom, can I go to see this movie? And Dad, can you take me to see? You know, little kids have no money, so we're all beggars. So you're like, oh, and this is also, I was 9 years old. So this is when I was just starting to make my own money. I used to sell newspapers and things like that. I was an entrepreneur since I was a small child. But anyway, one day in 1981, it was a weird experience. I would open up the movie section. And if you picture a newspaper, when you open it up, it's pretty big, especially if you're a little 9-year-old kid. It's a big piece of paper. I opened it up, and an entire page, they had purchased an entire page, was one picture from one movie. And I'd never seen that before, because usually in the newspaper, it was, each movie got a little like square section. And sometimes for big movies like Star Wars, it was a big square. But this fucking movie was the whole page. And I went, what in the hell? And just the fact that it was so big and weird, it just blew me away. And I'm sitting there, and it was a picture of a cowboy. That was my interpretation as a 9-year-old. It was a picture of a cowboy. I went, okay, there's a cowboy, and there's a little truck. If you remember the iconic Indiana Jones picture from the original Raiders Lost Ark, where it focuses on him, he's got his hand on his shoulder that's holding his bullwhip, and there's little pictures of the scenes and characters around him. So there's a picture of a woman in a white dress running. There's a picture of an old truck. There's a picture of him whipping something. I'm like, what is this? A cowboy movie? And I wasn't into cowboys. I didn't give a shit about cowboys. When I was a kid, cowboys was my dad's generation. Cowboys was, that was a baby boomer thing. I'm Generation X. So cowboys was a baby boomer / World War II General John Wayne and that kind of crap. And it was fine. I didn't, cowboys, like, I was just confused. I don't get this. And my dad walked by. He saw me looking at the paper. And he said, look at that. I said, yeah, what is it? I asked him. He said, well, look who that is. And I looked at the cowboy and I'm like, okay, it's a cowboy. He's like, no. Look carefully. Look at his face. Look who that is. And I looked and I couldn't see it. I just saw a cowboy. He's like, I said, what? It's a cowboy. What? He goes, no. Caleb, look, that's Han Solo. And my eyes got wide and I looked back at the piece of paper. I looked back at the picture. I looked at this man's face and then I saw it. I went, what the fuck? Han Solo is a cowboy with facial hair and a whip and a gun? Oh my God, this is gonna be awesome. What the fuck is this? Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I had no idea what Raiders meant, what Lost Ark meant. I'm a 9-year-old. I don't know any of this shit. I have no fucking idea. I just knew, oh my God, Han Solo, he looks so different. I gotta go see this movie. Holy crap. And I got really excited. And then a little later, we were at another movie. The movie had not come out yet, and I saw a trailer for Raiders Lost Ark. And I don't remember the trailer exactly, but it said something like, we have taken George Lucas, the guy who made Star Wars, and we have taken Steven Spielberg, the guy who made Jaws and Close Encounters. These two amazing fucking filmmakers, and we've put them together, and they have made Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm like, oh, wow, okay, I guess that is kind of cool. And again, I'm 9. I don't know quite the history of this stuff, but it seemed very big and very important and very unique. So then finally I saw the movie, and I don't remember who I was with. I must have been with my family, my dad, maybe one of my little brothers. Probably not. My little brothers were like babies back then, so I probably saw it with me and my dad. Probably that's about it. Maybe a friend. Don't remember the details. And it changed my life forever. And I didn't know at the time. I just saw this movie that was amazing to me in every way, that was perfect in every way, that was better than Star Wars. And that's like heresy. I mean, you didn't say that back in those days. Star Wars was the greatest thing on earth back in the early 80s when you were Gen X and you were a little kid growing up in the Star Wars era. But no, this was better. And I loved Star Wars. I worshiped Star Wars. I had every Star Wars thing, every Star Wars toy I could afford, which wasn't much, but I had everything. And this was better. And this character of Indiana Jones was better than Han Solo. He was better than Captain Kirk. He was better than all these guys. He was a complete and total alpha male. He could travel anywhere in the world he wanted to, whenever he wanted. He banged hot girls. Now that wasn't as significant to me as it was a little later in life, obviously, but I could still see the appeal of that. And as I'll talk about in a minute, in that movie, it's not only that he had sex with girls, he had sex with much younger women. I will talk about that in a little bit. He had a gun, he had a whip. He was very good at his job. He was ultra intelligent. He was extremely skilled. So the very first scene where he's like, stand out of the light, don't get in the light. Little tiny details like that. He knew all of that stuff. He was a very skilled badass. Again, the very first scene of that movie where he's looking out of the water and he just hears a click. He just hears a click. That's it. And he turns his head a little bit and he knows that's a fucking gun. He whips around, whips the dude, knocks the thing out of his hand. The guy runs off and it goes dun, 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 dun. And he gets this iconic entrance that is almost the entrance of a villain. It almost felt like he was a villain. Completely different than Han Solo, and better. And I worshiped Han Solo. Everything about this man. His house, the scene in his house. He had this cool, the way it was shot, Spielberg shot this thing, just a cozy, cool little house. And I'm like, oh, when I grow up, I'd love to have a house like that. That's so cool. And this is even considering that I was a 9-year-old and I didn't have the context for the majority of the stuff in the movie. So it said, the beginning of the movie, it says South America, 1938. I had no idea what that meant. I just thought, okay, that was a few years ago? All right, because again, I'm 9. I don't know anything. I don't know what South America means. I didn't know what Nazis meant. I just thought, okay, Nazis are bad people from history. So at some point in history, and the swastika, I didn't know what that meant. I just said, okay, that's the symbol of these bad guys. I didn't have any context for this stuff. I didn't have any context for the underlying stuff about the villain being French and the Nazis being uncomfortable at the end by doing a Jewish religious ceremony, and all the different countries, what Cairo meant and what that was like, and Nepal. I didn't understand this stuff. Now, it was very helpful to have those scenes in the movie where you saw the plane and the little dot is moving to the different parts of the world, and just that turned me on. Oh my God, I want to travel. I want to see the world. I want to go see other countries. I want to go see other places. I mean, my little suburban town in Portland, Oregon is fine, but I'm sure there's lots cooler places than this, and I want to go see them. And wouldn't it be neat, I thought as a kid and later as a teenager and things like that, to have the financial wherewithal to go anywhere I wanted, whenever I wanted, just like Indiana Jones had. Even though Indiana Jones didn't pay for it, his boss paid for it and things like that. So those are minor details I didn't quite understand, but you get my point. Again, I was 9 years old. So despite the fact that I had no context for any of this history and any of this geography and any of this cultural stuff, I had no idea. The movie hit me like no other movie had ever hit me before and has ever hit me since. There has not been another movie, and there's been lots of good movies prior to about 1995 that were very, very, very good, that were amazing, but none of them hit me the way that Raiders of the Lost Ark hit me. Even to this day, when I rewatch that movie, and I don't have a lot of time these days to watch movies, but I rewatched it about a year ago, and I loved every second of that movie. I wasn't tired of anything. It was perfect. It is literally a perfect movie, and those are rare. It's not the only perfect movie. There are other perfect movies. Aliens would be an example of another perfect movie. So not only is it a perfect movie, though, it is a movie that, and I didn't know this at the time, set the stage for the rest of my life. I found someone who I wanted to be like. And another thing, too, is that Indiana Jones was also fallible. So he would make mistakes. He would fuck up. He would get beat up. He would get hurt. He would get defeated. I mean, the very first scene of the movie, the villain comes right, he does all this work, the villain walks right in and takes the idol from him, which is kind of smart. So the villain in Raiders of the Lost Ark is actually pretty sharp. I'll just have this dumbass Indiana Jones do all the hard work, and once he gets the thing, I'll just steal it from him. Smart, smart. So he was also human. Unlike characters that came a little later like Rambo and Terminator and things like that, who were these inhuman superhumans. Even today, a lot of the Marvel superheroes, these Marvel movies, they're larger than life superhumans. Indiana Jones was amazing but human. Then if you fast forward to when I'm an adult and I rewatch this movie, all of a sudden there's a whole new set of topics that then relate to me again. For example, there is a scene in that movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he's on the ship and he's just gone through hell with that amazing action scene with the truck. And he's wounded all over the place and he moves, he's like, and he has these aches and pains all over his body. And Marion makes some kind of comment about he's getting old. Now, here's the other thing too, is that Harrison Ford was 40 when he made that movie. He was 40. He was not a young man. And he was 40 in 1980 when they made that movie. Maybe 38, but 38 or 40. 40, as I've discussed at my blogs, 40 years old back in 1980 was old. That is not like 40 today. I look younger than Harrison Ford did at age 49 than he did at age 40 in that movie. The human race is getting much, much, much younger, and the human race is much younger now than it was 40 years ago when this movie was recorded. So that's the other thing that appealed to me, is that he was not some young, studly, good-looking guy. Yes, Harrison Ford's very good-looking, but you know my point. You get what I'm saying. It's not some young, pretty boy type guy, which was kind of the standard and has been the standard for a long time in Hollywood in terms of guys starring in movies. It wasn't like that. He was a scruffy old guy. And matter of fact, during certain parts of that movie, he's complaining about how old he is. I love that. To this day, I love movies starring old men. I like that. I think actors such as Pierce Brosnan and Kevin Costner, who were okay in their prime, are much more entertaining and interesting to watch in movies today than they ever were back in the 80s or 90s. That's my opinion. I just have this affinity for watching movies about old men. That's probably why I like the goddamn Expendables movies, because again, that's my childhood and now they're all old, which I kind of like. And I relate to that because I'm an old man. I'm 49. So I'm old. I'm not really old, but I'm definitely not young anymore. And anyway, back to the scene. In this scene, she makes some kind of smart-ass remark about how old he is. And he says, it's not the years, it's the mileage. And when I saw that scene as an adult, completely related to that, because, and maybe I've mentioned this before, maybe I haven't, all of the wounds and problems, little problems I have with my body or have experienced with my body, none of them are due to aging. They're all due to damage and wear and tear that my body has occurred by living on this earth for 49 years. So here's some examples. I have this really weird pinched nerve in my right foot. Every once in a while it flares up. It hasn't flared up in a long time, so maybe it's gone now. But for decades I had this. Maybe I still have it, I'm just not aware of it because I'm used to it. That is because I twisted my foot back when I was, 24 years old. I was 24 years old running on the track, and I twisted my foot and I somehow mashed this nerve, and it's a permanent damage from that running experience, a billion fucking years ago, 25 years ago. I have tinnitus or tinnitus. I think it's called tinnitus. I think it's pronounced that. In one of my ears, in my right ear. I can't hear it right now, but late at night in bed, if I focus on it, I can hear a slight ringing in my ear. It's a permanent condition. There's no cure for it, and it's damage. I heard some kind of loud noise, probably at one of the Ozzy Osbourne concerts I went to in my 20s, that blew out part of my eardrum, and that's just the way it goes. And again, it's damage. Nothing to do with aging, it's damage. A while back, a few years back, I went and had my eyes checked, my regular eyes check, at the optometrist, and he said, "Holy shit, you have a hole in your eye." I actually had a hole in my eyeball. It was too small to see, but I literally had a hole. I said, "Why do I have a fucking hole?" He goes, "Well, something happened. A sliver or something or a rock or something hit it at some point, and it was just small enough to not, cause a lot of problems, but you probably have had it's probably gotten worse over time, blah, blah, blah." So I had to take a bunch of medications and put a bunch of crap in my eyeballs for about 2 years to heal this hole in my eye. My eyesight's fine. It has nothing to do with my eyesight. But again, wear and tear, not because of aging, but because when you live long enough, certainly as a man, and certainly as a man with my lifestyle, where you're traveling the world all the time, you're having lots of sex, you're exercising, 5-6 days a week, you're gonna get damaged. and Indiana Jones is the epitomization, is that a word? Epitomization of that. Of how it's not just about aging, it's also about wear and tear in terms of taking permanent damage as you get older and experience more time on this earth. And so again, I relate to him. So I related to him as a young boy. I related to him completely as a teenager. I related to him as a young man. Today I relate to him as an old man. Something else that resonated with me, and this is one of the seeds of Alpha Male 2.0, is that he was, in a sense, location independent. Now, he wasn't technically location dependent. He was a teacher, and he had to go back to his classroom and teach. And he wasn't technically self-employed because he had a boss. But he could go anywhere in the world whenever the hell he felt like it. And for some reason, they were able to finagle that with his teaching schedule. Things like that. That really resonated with me. He seemed free. He was free. By the way, that also related to Han Solo, where Han Solo could hop in his spaceship and go wherever he wanted. He didn't have a 9-to-5 job or an 8-to-5 job where he had to stay at a certain place. He didn't have any kids where he had to stay in a certain place because he had kids. He was not tethered to any one spot. He could go wherever he wanted. Even Captain Kirk kind of could go wherever he wanted, although a little different there because he had to follow orders and things like that. But you get my point. So after seeing this movie, I was a changed little boy. And as I explained earlier, we did not have video cassette tapes. We didn't have the internet. And so I needed more of this movie. I needed more of that energy in my little body. And so I went back and saw that movie 4 more times. I took my dad, and I think I went by myself at one point. Then whenever I heard like one of my friends say, "Oh, we're gonna go see that new Raiders Lost Ark movie," I said, "Can I come? Can I come? Can I come?" And so I did that at least twice. I would tag along with some of my friends and their family to go see it again. And I ended up seeing 5 times. And I went out and I bought all the paraphernalia. I got the record. Oh, the record. And I would listen to that music, and that music was even better than Star Wars, which I didn't think was possible. And the best song, or the best piece of music, I should say, on the Raiders of the Lost Ark soundtrack is the piece called Desert Chase. If you have never heard this, or if you've just seen the movie maybe once or twice a long time ago and that's it, you don't really remember the music, I suggest you go on YouTube one of these days, type in Raiders of the Lost Ark Desert Chase, and just listen to that music. It is just as good as anything Beethoven or Mozart or Brahms or any of those guys have ever conducted and created. It's an amazing work of art that may never be surpassed. especially today, since today the art of really good soundtracks in movies is kind of gone away. That about 15 years ago, I'm not sure why they did this. 15, 20 years ago, Hollywood decided that theme music and soundtracks aren't a thing anymore, and all the music now is just kind of boring, with rare exceptions. So I have listened to that track of music, I don't know how many thousands of times throughout my life, throughout my childhood, teenage years, as a young man, and all the way up to today. I will still occasionally listen to that music as I'm working or as I'm doing something else. It is the greatest piece of music in my life. It is my favorite single piece of music, better than any other song I've ever heard in my life. And that goes along with the rest of the music in that movie. So I bought everything. I bought all the books. I bought all the making of books. I bought the record. I bought the little tiny record. I bought everything I could buy. There was at one point one of the movie theaters in my area, when the movie really took off, one of the movie theaters in my area was offering his hat, the Indiana Jones hat. And you put your name in a drawing in a big bowl, and if they drew your name, you'd get the hat. And I just about had a fucking orgasm. 9-year-old kid going, oh my God, Indiana Jones hat? Holy, oh my God, I've got to have. Now, I didn't understand it was not literally his hat. I figured that out later. But it was the same make and model of the hat that he wore in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I went up to this place. I don't know how I found the time to do this, but I did this. You had to tear off a little piece of paper and fill out your name and your phone number. And I tore off about 20 of them. 20 of these pieces of paper. And I wrote my name and I wrote my phone number 20 fucking times. And I had a big handful of wad of these little things. And I threw them in the bowl and I mixed it up with my hand. I had to wait for the guy to turn and not see me. The guy would work on the counter. So whenever he walked, I would stir it up in the thing. So, and then a week or two later, my dad gets the phone call, hey Caleb, you won the hat. I went, and I basically passed out. Oh my God, I'm gonna have Indiana Jones's hat. And the guy told my dad, he's like, well, no wonder your fucking son won this thing. He put like 20 goddamn pieces of paper with his name on the ball. But fuck you, he was, they honored it. So I went down the movie, my dad took me down. My mom? I think my mom did. No, I think it was my dad. Dad took me down, got the hat. And unfortunately, and I didn't mind this at the time, I minded later, it was the kid's size version of the hat. Because if it was an adult size, it would have just covered my face because I was a little kid. So it was the kid, so I could actually put it on and wear it. I'm like, oh. And I remember I had this stupid little like red feather. I said, why is there a red feather? Indiana Jones doesn't wear a fucking feather. My dad's like, I don't know, they just put that in, just throw it out. So I did, I just pull it out and threw it out. So I had Indiana Jones hat. And to this day, I still have that hat. I've got a box of 2 big plastic boxes from my childhood, little knickknacks from my childhood in storage. And that hat is in there. It doesn't fit me anymore. It's for little kids, but I have that hat. Really cute. So, plus I also related to this guy because he had my last name. My name is Caleb Jones. This is Indiana Jones. And I didn't quite understand back when I was 9 years old that Jones is like the second most popular last name in the United States. Only Smith is more popular, which is interesting because the original name of Indiana Jones, George Lucas's original notes, was Indiana Smith. But I digress. But my point is, I felt this affinity because we had the last name. So I can really be like him. Matter of fact, a few years later, I talked to my mom. I said, Mom, can I legally change my name to Indiana? What would be involved? How much would that cost? What kind of forms would I have to file? And I was serious about it. Now, again, I was like 10 or 11 years old. So, And then later, I didn't know this, but later I found out my daughter, and she just told me for the first time when I did a YouTube video with her, and this YouTube video is up on my channel if you want to watch it, where I talked to her about an hour and a half. She wanted to change her first name to Indiana at some point when she was like, I don't know, 16, 17, 18 years old, something like that. I don't remember. So, and I didn't even know that at the time. I didn't know that that movie had that level of effect on her as well. So, as you know, there were 2 other Indiana Jones movies. I was very excited to see them, and I was slightly disappointed. They aren't as good. And I'm not even talking about Crystal Skull. I'm talking about Temple of Doom and Last Crusade. They were fun movies. They are entertaining movies, but they weren't anywhere near, and I still feel this way today, they weren't anywhere near as good as Raiders of the Lost Ark. Temple of Doom and Last Crusade were much more cartoony and much more silly. They didn't have the visceral feeling of Raiders of the Lost Ark. There was some level of realism in Raiders of the Lost Ark that I think was lost in Temple of Doom when they're sitting there and they're eating monkeys' brains and eating snakes and the beautiful blonde heroine's like, oh, woo, she's like passing out. And Marion Ravenwood, the character, the woman lead in Raiders of the Lost Ark, one of the things I liked, and I didn't realize this at the time, but one of the things I liked is that she looked like a normal woman. She did not look like a blonde, big-titted, perfect heroine, which was kind of the 80s archetype, which I really enjoyed once I went through puberty and started liking girls, hell to the yes. But in terms of appreciating a movie for its realism, she looked like a normal girl. She looked like a normal girl that you would see in real life. Whereas the women in the later two movies, these gorgeous blondes, look like super hot, supermodel blonde 10s, and it killed some of the realism. And there's a lot of comedy and cartoonishness in those movies. Again, they're not bad movies. They're both very good movies. Far better than most movies in the past 30 years, of course. But they weren't nearly as good as Raiders of the Lost Ark. And of course, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was just ridiculous and stupid. Let's not even talk about that. So when I talk about Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, I'm just talking about that movie. I'm not even talking about Temple of Doom or Last Crusade or the other movies, because I don't consider those truly canon. I know they are, but in my heart, they aren't, because, and even George Lucas and Steven Spielberg will admit that they didn't do a good job, particularly on Temple of Doom and Last Crusade. They were in weird places in their lives. George Lucas was going through a divorce because monogamy doesn't work, and Steven Spielberg was doing a thing where he didn't want to do a third movie, and anyway, so it wasn't the full-on effort that they really gave with Raiders of the Lost Ark. Other alpha male aspects of Indiana Jones, which resonated with me either consciously or subconsciously, and there's a lot of both to this, is not only that he was an alpha male, not only that he was strong, not only that he was human, not only that he was free, but things like he would date women, but he would date a lot of younger women. So, and this was lost on me as a young man, certainly as a child, and certainly even as a teenager. I didn't pick this up until I rewatched the movie later in life when I was an adult. When he's in the bar in Nepal talking to Marion, they're really talking about how they used to fuck when she was an underage teenager, when she was a girl. I was a child. I was in love. She was like, if you do the math, it was something like she was 14, 15 years old, and he was like 30. So bad Indiana Jones. Now, this was set in the 1930s. That wasn't nearly as big of a deal back then as it would be today. So you have that. Also, and by the way, I'm not saying it's a good thing to fuck underage girls. Please don't do that. I've written numerous articles and parts of my books where you need to check ID before you touch, and you need to know the age of consent before you have sex with women in any given city. Very, very important. Okay, please hear me on this. Don't be stupid. All right, but moving on, there was a scene that was cut out from Raiders of the Lost Ark. So the scene where Marcus, his boss, comes over to his house at night. And you will notice if you watch that scene today, as the door rings and Indiana Jones walks over to open the door, he's quickly putting on a robe. Well, the reason he's quickly putting on a robe is the scene right before that they cut out, he was fucking one of his students. And she was in this robe, almost naked under the robe. And so she's like saying, "Oh, Indy, don't get the door. This is our time together." He's like, "Whatever, bitch." And he rips the robe off of her, and she has like this sexually negligee, and she runs into another room. And he puts on the robe because he was naked. That's why he's putting on the robe. That puts new context in the scene where he's in his classroom and he's teaching his students, and the girl closes her eyes and it says "love you" on her eyelids, and he's kind of like, whoa. New context there, because it's not just a girl hitting on a nerdy guy, it's a girl hitting on an alpha male who knows he could get that girl if he wanted to, because I doubt in the 1930s there were a lot of rules against teachers fucking their own students. And I believe the place he taught at was a college, not a high school, so maybe they were of age, who knows. I don't think that's really relevant to the overall theme of the character. And these things didn't dawn on me until, again, I watched these things later in life. Watching the movie a year or two ago, I was surprised to see how much influence that movie had over the lifestyle I now live. And a lot of this was just subconscious, of me having this movie wired into my subconscious at age 9, and me thinking about it a lot and getting it reprogrammed in my subconscious and reinforced in my subconscious over and over again. So today, now am I Indiana Jones? No. I actually shave. I'm clean shaven. I don't wear a cowboy hat. I am a lot heavier than Harrison Ford. He was actually kind of a little guy. So no, I'm not. But I travel the world whenever I want, and I go wherever I want, whenever I want. That's a normal part of my lifestyle now. I have sex with multiple women whenever I want, just like he did. in those movies. And practically, that's one of the things that carried through all the movies. He had sex with whomever he wanted, whenever he wanted, and it wasn't any big deal. I do that now, and I've been doing that for, 14, 15 years now. Even as a married man, I still do that. The work that I do is work that I feel very strongly about and very passionate about, the same as him. He is not, now unlike me, Indiana Jones is not in it for the money. He doesn't care about the money. He doesn't want to sell the things that he gets. He wants to put them in museums so they can be studied and appreciated, and because he feels strongly about that. That's very similar to me. I feel very strongly about the things that I do in my work life. I have a very strong mission, just like Indiana Jones did. The big difference is I care a lot about money. Indiana Jones doesn't really give a shit about that. And he's kind of a James Bond-like character in that he doesn't really need to worry about money because he's funded by his school, the same way James Bond is funded by his government. So it's interesting that those two characters are not really influenced by money because money is a non-issue in their lives. Not super realistic in terms of real life. Money is a very big issue in your life, and you need to get it handled just like you need to get sex and relationships handled. Indiana Jones also fucks up. He makes mistakes. I fuck up all the time. I've talked about this in my YouTube videos. I fuck up and make mistakes all the time, but I keep going. I don't let my mistakes faze me. That's right out of Indiana Jones. A big guy who's way bigger than him, that big Nazi at the end with the spinning blades and the big cool airplane. The big Nazi guy is beating the shit out of him. And Indiana Jones is bloody, he's dirty, he's on the ground, he's dizzy, but he keeps going. Very Rocky-like. He keeps pressing, he keeps going. I make mistake after mistake after mistake. I have lots of little failures. I don't do big failures. Big failures are bad. I avoid those. But in terms of little mistakes, medium mistakes, I make those all the time. But I keep going because I want what I want the same way Indiana Jones wants what he wants. Another similarity is that Indiana Jones is kind of an asshole. He's kind of a prick sometimes. Legitimately. I don't just say that to be funny. There are times in that movie he's kind of a jerk. And I'm not a jerk, but I'm very blunt. I'm very outcome independent. I can hurt people's feelings. I can say the wrong things because I'm so outcome independent, I don't give a fuck. So that's another similarity. Now, maybe that's an inborn part of my personality, or maybe that's a part of my personality that grew over time as I worked on my outcome independence. Maybe it's a combination of both. I don't know. But certainly that could have been an influence. Who knows? I don't know. Obviously, I do not get into physical altercations. I don't whip people with whips. I don't shoot people with guns, because that is the fantasy element of the movie that isn't realistic. And it's also a historical thing that would be accurate to modern day life. So unless you're in the armed forces or you're, you're a professional MMA fighter, you're not gonna go have those experiences. So certainly that is a factor. Although I was into martial arts heavily when I was a young man, and once I accomplished my first 2 or 3 tiers of physical goals, I would love to get back into martial arts. That is something I definitely will be doing in my 50s. So I'm gonna be an old man in the martial arts class or in the dojo or at the one-on-one lessons or what have you. That'll be fun. So that was a very strong part of my life though, for most of my teenage years, into my early 20s a little bit, was martial arts. We didn't have MMA back then, we called it full contact. But that may have been a component of that, I don't know, of me trying to find my alpha maleness, of me trying to be a man. I didn't have those terms back then. But as I said in my childhood, and I've written about this before, I didn't have any alpha male role models when I was a kid growing up, with the exception of my karate teacher. And my dad was a mild alpha male 1.0, but he was more of just a family man, business guy. He wasn't someone like Indiana Jones. And so a lot of the martial arts stuff, I think, when I was a kid, was my effort to become a man and to learn how to become an alpha male from those influences of Indiana Jones, Han Solo, Captain Kirk, certainly Schwarzenegger and Stallone a few years later, things like that. So you can see how there is direct linkages between that movie and the character of Indiana Jones and Alpha Male 2.0, living a lifestyle of long-term happiness via long-term freedom. Because if anything, Indiana Jones represents, to a degree, masculine freedom. He has sex whenever he wants with women who are attractive, he travels the world, and so on. And as has been analyzed by people who are much better at this than I am in terms of analyzing movies, one of the many reasons why Kingdom of the Crystal Skull did not work is because he lost all those aspects as an old man. He was no longer this guy who traveled the world. He was no longer this guy who would, beat people up and things like that. He was no longer this guy who would have sex with attractive women, because he's an old man now. And that just didn't really make sense. And so people did not want to vicariously be the Indiana Jones of the Crystal Skull, whereas they did want to be, men in particular, men wanted to be him and women wanted to fuck him, the Indiana Jones of the first 3 movies. Also, you may notice, because I have certainly noticed, that Indiana Jones, those 3 movies, became one of the standards for what is attractive in an attractive alpha male. And a lot of women starting in the 90s and the 2000s started to say things like, where are all the good men? Where are all the men like Harrison Ford? Where are all the men like Indiana Jones? Now that's another topic for another time. The answer is, sweetheart, there were men like him. You killed them via feminism and political correctness and touchiness and divorce laws and blah, 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 blah. Topic for another time. If you watch Red Pill YouTube videos, you already know much more about this than you need to know, so I'm not going to get into that. But this was so iconic, it actually became a standard in society. And those of you who are my age, you remember all the Indiana Jones knockoffs that came right after Raiders of the Lost Ark. Some of them very good, like Romancing the Stone. Great, great, great movie. Some of them terrible, like the Alan Quatermain movie and the Tales of the Lost Monkey TV series. And there's a bunch of crap that came out after Indiana Jones because no one could duplicate George Lucas's writing and or Steven Spielberg's directing style and or the dialogue of that movie and everything else, including the latter 2 movies, which, like I said, were not as good as Raiders of the Lost Ark. There is no other character and there is no other movie that I don't think I will ever see that will influence me and touch me and change my life as much as Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones in that movie. There are other characters, fictional characters, that have influenced me, that were strong influences on my life, but they were not in movies, they were in novels. Characters like Corwin of Amber and various other things I could talk about. Maybe on a future podcast I could talk about that if you found this interesting. Wow, this podcast has gone for a long time. Damn, it's longer than my usual podcast. Like I said, this is different today. And I don't know if this has been entertaining or helpful for you. And if it was, let me know, and I can certainly do more emotional, positive rants about things that have influenced me. The only reason I bothered to do this was to show you the connective tissue between Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark in that movie and Alpha Male 2.0, which is both the lifestyle I live and the lifestyle I love and the lifestyle that I teach and the lifestyle that I think I want to teach for the rest of my life to some degree, one degree or another. If there wasn't an Indiana Jones, if there wasn't a Raiders of the Lost Ark, I don't know if there would be an Alpha Male 2.0. I would still probably be successful, but I don't know if I would live this particular lifestyle. And I don't know if I'd be teaching this particular lifestyle. I don't know. So it's entirely possible that we all have something to thank in terms of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and Lawrence Kasdan, the guys who made the original Raiders of the Lost Ark, and certainly Harrison Ford. I don't want to leave him out of the equation. Harrison Ford is certainly a key to this. And as some of you may know, it was going to actually be Tom Selleck. Harrison Ford was not going to be the guy. Harrison Ford was not going to be Indiana Jones. George Lucas specifically said, I don't want Harrison Ford. He's already in my Star Wars movies. I don't want to be the guy who just has Harrison Ford for all his fucking movies. I want Tom Selleck. And Tom Selleck had to bail out the last minute because he was doing Magnum P.I., his famous TV show from the 80s. So George Lucas reluctantly had Harrison Ford do it, and Harrison Ford, of course, just knocked it out of the park. Now, something very interesting that I should mention about that is that Harrison Ford, in real life, is a total fucking beta. And one of the problems I had when I was a kid was when I finally saw Harrison Ford being interviewed in a real interview many years later. Not when I was 9, probably when I was, 13, 14 years old. He would go on talk shows like Arsenio Hall, or he'd be interviewed by people in 60 Minutes or things like that. And I would get so excited. Oh my God, they're going to interview Harrison Ford. They're going to interview Han Solo. They're going to interview Indiana Jones. And then if you watch some of those interviews, he's not quite as bad today in some interviews because he's a very different person. He's a very different man these days. Harrison Ford's a grumpy, crouchy old man these days. But back in those days, in the 80s, it was terrible to watch him in interviews. He would fidget. He would fidget with his fingers. He would stutter. He was super nervous. He was terrified. He didn't want to be there. He was the epitome of the nervous pussycat beta male, and it really hurt me to watch Harrison Ford behave that way. Matter of fact, there was one interview where he was on Arsenio Hall in like 1989 or something, and he kept fidgeting with his fingers and stumbling over his words like that. Arsenio Hall literally said, "So you stop that?" And he slapped his hands so he would stop fidgeting with his fingers. And and Harrison Ford, I'm sorry, very beta. And I had to turn the TV off. I said, I can't let this poison my view of these mythical alpha male characters, particularly Indiana Jones. So that was kind of difficult for me, but that was a good education for me to know that what you see in movies isn't real. Sometimes tough guys in movies really are real life alpha males. Sylvester Stallone is the ultimate example of that. Arnold Schwarzenegger is certainly an example of that. But sometimes tough guys in movies are fucking pussies in real life. Hugh Jackman's kind of a pussy and total beta. Harrison Ford was a total beta. He's a little less beta today, but he's an old grouchy old man now. A whole different story about him now. But anyway, so that was another part of my education growing up, is to not believe and not get too enamored in these fake things. So I had to learn to appreciate the Indiana Jones character exclusive and external to the actor that portrayed him, who was a total nervous little pussycat beta male who kind of made me embarrassed to even watch him. So that was interesting too. That being said though, Harrison Ford did fuck Princess Leia in real life. So you gotta always throw that in there. He had a huge affair with Carrie Fisher back in the Star Wars days. It was great. So, he's a beta male, but he definitely got some pussy. All right, we'll give him that, because he's just a good looking guy, hilarious. So that's it. I don't know if I meandered too much this podcast, but this is something that is very special to me and very important to me. When I saw that this was the 40-year anniversary of this movie, I wanted to share with you my thoughts on it and my history with it and why it connects to the topics that we talk about here at Alpha Male 2.0. There is no other movie that epitomizes, I think, Alpha Male 2.0 as much as Raiders Lost Ark. There are other Alpha Male 2.0-ish characters in movies and TV shows, and it might be fun. I know guys have asked me to do this in the past, I could do a podcast or maybe a video on those characters and how they're Alpha 2.0. Maybe I'll do that down the road. But that's it. That's all I've got for today. I'm going to get back to my day off. I'm working on my day off. I'm being a very bad boy. But I didn't talk much about work in this podcast. See how I finagled it and broke the rules a little bit? Bend the rules? That's how we roll, bro. All right. Have fun, guys. Hope this has helped. Talk to you soon. Bye.